got to do so. My college education was rough-edged, and as Bobby said, I never got a college diploma. I am proud to say, however, that the Alumni Association of the Philippine Polytechnic University of the Philippines, formerly Philippine College of Commerce, chose to consider me as an outstanding PCC alumnus in 1999 for pursuing my political advocacy. I am not identified with academic or scholarly research. My boyhood dream of studying in UP began when my father's cousin happened to bring a copy of the pre-war Filipinensian to our home. I lived avidly through its pages, gazing at the photographs of student leaders at that time. I thought I could be like them in UP someday. I soon realized that was an impossible dream. Still, some years later, enrolled at the Lyceum of the Philippines, the influence of UP intellectuals there, notably Sotero H. Laurel, one of the leaders in the Filipinensian, who was the president of the Lyceum of the Philippines, and then Jose A. Lansang of the School of Journalism, whom Albert Ordonez says used to be discussing with them in these days at the Collegian. Their views reinforced my nationalist orientation and honed my analytical skills. Yes, you could have that experience outside of UP. Just as today, our young people continue to be taught by UP products in many of our institutions of learning, at least those UP graduates who have chosen to commit themselves to this country, and there are many of them. The youthful hope of being able to enter UP fired me up to study hard, even as I continued to help my parents and siblings with the work on the farm. Thus, finishing high school as class salutatorian was a cruel blow to me, because being valedictorian would have entitled me to a UP scholarship. That was one of my earliest frustrations in life, and I remember it with pain to this day. But then again, it might not have made a difference because my parents would not have been able to afford the other costs entailed by having a son in UP, even on a scholarship. Let us note that now, half a century later, the new UP Charter now explicitly mandates the university to take affirmative action to enhance the access of disadvantaged students to its programs and services. There are thousands upon thousands of poor boys and girls for whom the doors of this state university failed to open in the last 100 years. Former Chief Justice Artemio V. Panganiban was one of them in the early 1950s, who, although he had been granted a UP scholarship, had to enroll instead at the Far Eastern University because he could not afford the cost of transport to Dillon. As the head of the FEU Student Council, he recently reminisced in a column in the Daily Inquirer that he especially prized the friendships of fellow student leaders from UP because they were trained to think and behave independently, and they upheld student rights at the risk of their own studies and careers. In my own encounters with UP student leaders at that time, I held most of them in high esteem for their intellectual keenness and their boldness in taking the initiative. I also encountered some who annoyed others by their intellectual arrogance and hubris. And yes, their frivolousness. My first experience of student life in Manila was at the Philippine College of Commerce, the quintessential college of the poor, with its overcrowded classrooms in cramped wooden buildings at Lepanto, Manila. It was at various student conferences held annually that the budding politicians and fledgling writers among us met each other. At a YMCA conference held in Baguio, I was put in charge of the daily newsletter, one issue of which came out with 2 steamy poems by UP's Sunny San Juan, now a staid but unrepentant academic in America, who recently sent me a copy of his latest book titled U.S. Imperialism and Revolution in the Philippines, published last year. That publication earned me an upbraiding by the conference advisor, a well-known guardian of conservative politics. At another conference, I met other UP students, but I could distinctly recall among them the writer Pete Daroy, who invited me after some discussions over a conference paper I wrote to a colloquium in Diliman, but I was too intimidated to go and attend. Then came Jose Maria Sison. He invited me to join several small group discussions with members of the Student Cultural Association of the University of the Philippines, or the SCOUT. Being unfamiliar with the UP Diliman campus, I would meet somewhere else with the poet June Terra, and he would lead me to the Little Quiapo, if some of you remember that place, and other nooks in Diliman City. In the group that I had discussions with were Luis V. Teodoro, Vivencio Jose, Ferdinand Tinio, and Renato Espuno, now the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, your outstanding centennial alumnus. He was, at that time, the group's authority on issues surrounding the RP-US military bases agreement. From those SCOUT discussions emerged the publication of the Progressive Review, a radical quarterly, and subsequently the Kabataang Makabayan, which was organized in 1964. So much for the musings of a frustrated UP alumnus. Allow me now to begin my main discussion by paying the highest tribute to those who gave their best efforts and sacrificed their lives, most of them in the prime of their youth, to the revolutionary cause. While many of these heroes had studied in UP, there were others, more numerous in fact, from other schools and from all walks of life, who contributed to the National Democratic Revolutionary Movement since the mid-1960s and early 1970s. Similarly, let me salute the thousands of activists today, the older and the young, from UP and elsewhere, who, with commitment, enthusiasm, and hope, carry on the revolutionary struggle shoulder to shoulder with the masses through its multifarious ramifications, means, and methods up to its highest form. Regardless of how some people, or perhaps a good number of people, may view its continuing relevance to our national life, or its prospects of succeeding in its avowed goals, the National Democratic Revolutionary Movement is undeniably alive. It is persevering to advance and to win in the process of waging life and death struggle against the forces seeking its destruction. The movement is endeavoring to establish a genuine state of the people from its basic units in the countryside communities. It has had its ups and downs, its ebbs and flows. It has suffered setbacks from serious errors committed at various levels of its leadership, the most serious of which took place in the 1980s. A painful campaign was launched to rectify these errors, which has been largely successful, although some manifestations do appear now and then, indicating that lessons from the past have yet to be completely comprehended and assiduously applied. There are those who believe that armed struggle has become passé in this day and age. They include some who used to be involved in it and who still yearn for revolutionary change in our society, but have opted to contribute towards that end only through peaceful and legal means. Certainly, that is a positive, worthy undertaking. Having been part of the legal democratic mass movement for all these years, I have found rich meaning in my own work in the parliamentary arena, despite its numerous pitfalls and limitations. But let us listen to the insight of Hangel Baking, editor of the Philippine Collegian in 1940-41, twice jailed for political offenses. In a university convocation at the Abelardo Hall on January 23, 1970, shortly after being released from prison the first time, the grizzled revolutionary said, I quote, "Not all those who desire revolutionary change in the existing order subscribe to armed struggle. And the majority, perhaps to this day, believe they are contributing their share to the overall revolutionary struggle through peaceful and legal means. But this does not negate the reality of the armed struggle going on in our midst. And whatever settlements might be arrived at as resolutions to the basic conflicts in our society can no longer be said to have been resolved independent of this armed struggle. This is an important aspect," he said, "of our concrete historical situation, which renders theoretical discussions of means academic," unquote. Sometimes, indeed, it has been necessary to set aside the consideration and discussion of theoretical or academic issues due to the urgency of continually defending one's life and fundamental rights against vicious, murderous attacks. But through it all, the movement lives on. As the Macapagal Arroyo government itself acknowledges, the revolutionary movement remains the most formidable and most consistent challenge to the sense of security and the very survival not only of the current government, but of the entire ruling system that continues to rot and decay. What was UP's role in the beginning of this movement? Or rather, its self-renewal in the 1960s and 1970s for the present